Yeah, here we are. Why should we, in Mother's name of the planet Gaia Earth, and all in what she breeds into whatever object she ultimately links herself into, aside from the digital, formats of things, is why should we practice non-judgment? Because we won't be caught in a psychological field of an attachment, and how like that could attach to things like a person, place, or like an idea, and that idea creates a minor ghost, quote unquote, end quote, and we don't have to be a part of any format of that false ghost and whatever cloud of energy it's representing itself into. So like we could also practice non-judgment based on it being an emotional intelligence practice directly, and what that's doing is it's lessening the attachment to like to false stories and thoughts, and how those stories and thoughts create things, or they lead towards things, and as they're leading towards things, it's ultimately like casually going into a psychological field of an arena of confusion. So it's like the confusion is easily solved, but like not to, and I'm just like flowing with my own like how I would like to like go towards something of a neutrality within whatever that really means, because respectively everything that we're doing, it's just kind of like something of an initiatory phase. We're just barely knocking on the door, rudimentary to like what our selves are, because obviously this, going back to this basic notion, is like we don't necessarily know what eternity is until we like have time for ourselves, constructive solitude, and contemplate what that is. And that's like, it's kind of like its own conundrum, because as you're like caught up in whatever mundane moment you are, eternity is still holding all of these moments, whatever a moment really is, like beyond, like beyond like the solar system and stuff. So and then just practicing non-judgment is like, we don't really know what someone else could respectively teach us, and since we don't know what they could respectively teach us, we could like want to it's best not to burn bridges, because then we could want to like inquire how there's a different type of teamwork that's happening in infinite different flavors. So and then like non-judgment, that's a practice though, it's a practice that we have to respond to and psychologically choose within our micro free will, so we could ultimately be at like, ultimately respectively, just casually peace, peace, finding peace, and that peace being a component of jiva mukti, and it being a component of jiva mukti, yoga is a way of momentum of life, because it's like the principles are who am I repping today? Baby Blue Ghost. But shout out to Double Dragon, because the Double Dragon is the American soldier, the red dragon and the blue dragon, that is seeing both sides. And just to see how like, not any particular example, how that got into a like a narrative of polarity. So that's it right there. It's a narrative of polarity that's not necessarily like, we don't necessarily have to be entangled, because all my underground shit, it's ultimately pointing on how to get detangled in nuanced ways from the thoughts themselves, from the unnecessary lower octave emotions and feelings, and the stuff that they're creating. Just observe, watch, let things be, let people be what they are and who they are, regardless of whatever they're at, so it's like, it's coming from a certain intention of wholeness, because obviously like that's not going to stop from other people from the outside judging me. I realize that, I'm aware of that. It's not, and that's not, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing either, so it's emotional intelligence, like that's a practice, like, because obviously I wasn't always perfect at this, like, like not taking it personal, that's like that's like a lifelong practice, and like showing up within like doing your best to be honest, because like who's to say like how that's evolving and reshaping and mutating like our mind, body, and soul. Who's to say how that's doing that, you know? It is something is taking into account for that, because other things are reacting for them to balance approach you or polarity approach you, and based on how they react, that's a particular, like, you know, circumstance, or that is somewhere in the quote unquote future, end quote. But it's ultimately, if they don't recognize how they're like being polarized, then how do they expect to be whole when that's the ultimate way of getting spiritually like satisfactory, in the satisfactory state, you know, or fulfilled, you know, let's say fulfilled. So, and I just got out of a class, and shout out to like everyone doing like the best, you know, and like shout out to what's that other guy's name? I think Don Carlos or something. Or he write I forgot the author's name to the agreements of the of Cuatro or whatever. Don Miguel Ruiz. Yeah, shout out to that guy, because that's just, like, you know, that basic simplicity, it like more or less intermeshes in its own thing to like how we could like uphold our own character in a moral type of sense, you know. And why would we want to do that? Because the professional, you know, arena will assess it, you know, for what we are. But if it doesn't see the intention to actually get the real objective, which all of us more or less have clear objectives or not, like within having a clear objective, it's important to have a clear objective, so we ultimately know like what we're doing it for. And if we know what we're doing it for, we don't have to feel out of pocket, because we're convinced that we're going towards, you know, harmonic balance with everything that we do. And who am I saying about we? I'm just talking about like, you know, whatever God's resonance really is, because like it seems like there's like different types of like life algorithms coming alive, you know, for what we mentioned to some degree. One of our 9 chakras, that's like having a response ricochet to like how we're experiencing life. You know, the throat chakra, 1 out of 9 chakras, it's bringing it to life, for just a casual human design example. And I'm not trying to say like, I'm not necessarily affiliated with like, you know, anybody. I'm just trying to see like what's the source of that, you know, and seeing like how it's getting like, you know, changed in how whatever it's saying, how it's supposed to get changed. And who's to say like how much accurate it is, because we don't necessarily know what it's ultimately uncovered. And I go underground about like, you know, I've spoken about like the deeper concepts underground, like effortlessly, swiftly, and breezily, about like, you know, concepts of like, you know, the mutation of the solar plexus underground, you know, the coming of, you know, the energy Christ, quote unquote, Christ consciousness, end quote, of the like, you know, the collective energies of like how there's a new nexus network of what the Eron is. Like I've already like, and what that is, it's like that's the thing. I've already like I've already explained it in a different way. It's not like I could shadow clone myself right now, or like do some like clone, you know, Naruto stuff, like leaf clones of, and just like say like, oh yeah, he could recall that memory of that particular topic, but it's somewhere in time, you know, because I'm not necessarily explaining like 5 things at a time, or am I? So within that, it's like we know not what we like see, we know not what we judge, we know not what we like respectively sometimes do. And if we don't have someone to like course correct that casually from like whatever, however our microselves could really like, you know, go towards that bigger picture of like a bigger like galactic balance, you know, are we like are we going for the galactic balance respectively or not? And like I've had like, I'm not trying to compare it with anybody, you know, I don't need to prove shit, you know. If like whatever, you know, judgment you have, ironically, and this ties it in neatly, that's okay, you know, because that just like, you know, sees how I could like, you know, self-improve, you know. Like where's my emotional intelligence at? Where's your like confusion? Because within anybody's judgment they ultimately cast, you could detect the confusion with that with them, you know, like on a way you don't necessarily realize it. How? Because their judgment is fragmented and like kind of off key in nature. So if it's fragmented and off key in nature, then that's like that's a not whole truth that's leaning towards an energy of false, which is confusion. So you could detect people's confusion in their judgments. I'm going underground. Thank you guys. 10-10.